that Hillary's plan does is to have proven, widely accepted cost savings that will actually make health care better. And I mentioned one of them, electronic medical records. Now, there are a lot of young people in this audience tonight, and a lot of not so young people. But I will tell you, when you reach a certain age, you will have gone to the doctor over and over and over again. And every time you go to a new doctor, before you can get an aspirin, you have to answer the same questions you've been answering since you were 12 years old. Is that right? And to all the young people here, I can tell you there will come a time when you don't remember the answers anymore. But they still got to ask, and you still got to answer, or you can't get an aspirin, much less care. That adds billions of dollars to healthcare costs. And then because the doctor knows good and well you may not remember the answer, they do a lot of tests anyway that otherwise would be unnecessary if we had the records. That's billions more. And in spite of all that, mistakes are still made that have to be fixed, and that's billions more. So if you just did that one thing, it would save, most conservatively, $80 billion a year, 80% of the cost of helping every man, woman, and child. Significant difference. Because I saw the other day, Hillary's opponent said, requiring every American to have health insurance is like saying I'll solve homelessness by requiring every homeless person to buy a house. And if you believe that, you have a different alternative. But if you're tired of America making excuses for why we're the only country in the world without universal health care, there is now only one person left in the race for president who believes in affordable health care. Is to dramatically increase the quality and the access of education. Universal free kindergarten. Radically change that No Child Left Behind law. This is the only assured applaud line for every Democrat or Republican in every state in the country. You could go to Idaho where there's not a Democrat within 50 miles and say that and get the same applause. Because it doesn't work. Not even though they did not intend this. For those of you who don't know, this is a very big deal for Maine. What do you want for the young people of Maine in the context that we're discussing? You want your young people to learn at international levels of excellence, right? That's what we all want. And you wanted a test to measure it, you'd pick a hard test with a high score. And if you did that under this law, you'd lose your federal money. Here's how, by the way, we do know how we compare. There's good data on this. Our kids are quite competitive with people around the world at the 4th grade level. Which is amazing considering we have so many young people whose first language is not English. At the 8th grade level, there's an achievement gap, and it's quite significant by the 11th grade, and we know why. Because in other countries, kids go to school longer, because they have uniform standards throughout the country, and uniform curriculum, because relatively speaking, they pay the teachers more, particularly in the specialty subjects, the math, the science, the language, and technology. And because of one other thing you should be real proud of. Because we have a special education law that says every American child without regard to disability is entitled to meet and appropriate education. So, we know what the gap is. You wanted to catch up, you do that. Here's what No Child Left Behind does. It says to Maine, you got to give your kids 5 tests 5 years in a row. And we will give you federal money based on how your children do on that test. And then the law winks at the governor and the senator. Winks and says, don't worry about it too much. You get to pick the test and the passing score. Now think about this. Maine's like Arkansas, where I come from. It's not a rich state. You got to have that money, right? So if you pick an easy test with a low score, you get your check every year, easy as pie. And in the process of doing it, you might actually lower the achievement levels of your students when you're trying to raise them. Meanwhile, the teachers and the principals are miserable because they're having to teach them this test. And nobody thinks you need to give 5 tests 5 years in a row. That's what happened. That's why the applause lines came, for those of you who aren't in education. It's not because the teachers and the principals and the parents who know this, and the legislators who know it, don't want high standards for Maine schools. It's not because you don't want your kids to learn more. It's because this system is designed to give you just the reverse of what you want. Here's what Hillary would do instead. This is the important thing. It's important for you to ask, well, what would she do? Here's what she would do instead. First of all, she would say the national government should assume a much larger responsibility for recruiting, educating, and placing teachers in the shortage subjects in the shortage areas. That is, math, science, technology, and teachers in rural areas and big city areas. Secondly, the federal government has never paid its fair share of special education costs, and we will pay more. Every state can maintain its music programs, its arts programs, its broad curriculum. And thirdly, this is important, this is really important. She says that we ought to be striving for international standards of excellence, but we shouldn't punish people who do it. Why don't we look at what other organizations that have to repeat excellence do? Take the Army. Whether you disagree with the military policy in Iraq, which I assume most of us do, we wouldn't be here tonight. Everybody admits we got the best army in the world. Would you agree with that? Right. So, suppose you were the commander of 4 Army brigades. You, think about this. And 3 of them measured excellent by every standard. And in the 4th brigade, nobody could hit the broadside of a barn with a rifle. Now, would you give them all a test for 5 years? No. What would you do? You'd do what the Army does. You'd figure out what they're doing right in the first 3 brigades, and you'd get it right in the 4th brigade. That's what we ought to do in our schools. That's what she said. Our specific proposal is to find 20 grade schools, 20 middle schools, 20 high schools that are now, today, public schools performing at international levels of excellence with representative student bodies by race, by language, by income. Find out what they're doing right and pay to put that in all the schools of America. That will work much more, much better than those out there. Finally, she proposes to open the doors of college to all Americans. Raising the Pell Grants every year. More opportunity to earn money through the AmeriCorps Community Service Program. Raising the Home Scholarship Tax Credit from $1,650 a year to $3,500 a year. And changing the student loan program back to where it was more like it was in the 90s, where we had 13 million more kids getting college aid. The unscrupulous practices by private student loan companies have got to stop. They have to be limited in what they can charge. And every student should be able to borrow money and sign a contract committing to pay that loan back as a certain fixed small percentage of their income, so no young person will ever be discouraged from borrowing money. No one will ever drop out of college. She feels so strongly about this because when we met, we were in law school, and we both were our sole support, and we both had to borrow money to get out. And we were able to borrow money from the United States government at 2%. 2% interest. We've got some people paying 20% in America today. It is scandalous. You want to get rid of it? Elect her president, and she will. For all of you who don't have kids, let me tell you, we should all be for this. Because we know that every young person in America that gets at least 2 years of education after high school has a better than 50% chance of getting a job with a growing income. And everyone who doesn't has less than a 50% chance. We all have an interest in making college affordable for our young people. And when this was done before, and John Baldacci voted for it as a member of Congress, we did this. Students saved $9 billion. $9 billion. An average of $1,300 repayment on every $10,000 they borrow. But interestingly enough, billion. Why? Because once you let a young person sign on the dotted line, I will only have to pay this percentage of my income. Nobody defaulted on their student loan